No one saw it coming. A respected black police officer who had served his community in Maine for years was suddenly deported under Donald Trump's immigration crackdown. The shocking move sent waves of anger across America, leaving citizens asking, how could a man trusted to protect the city be treated like a criminal? Asterisk in the quiet towns of Maine, Officer Daniel was more than just a man in uniform. He was a guardian of hope. Every morning he walked his beat with a calm smile, greeting shopkeepers by name and helping elderly neighbors carry their groceries. Children ran up to him on their way to school, not with fear, but with laughter, knowing that this officer would always stop to listen to their stories. For years, Daniel had built a reputation not only as a protector, but as someone who truly belonged to the community he served. He mentored teenagers who had fallen into trouble, reminding them that mistakes did not define their future. He often stayed late after his shift, volunteering at youth centers and guiding kids through sports programs, believing that prevention was just as important as law enforcement. When families struggled, he was there with groceries from his own pocket, never seeking recognition, only wanting to ease their burden. His colleagues admired his discipline and fairness, often saying that if every officer carried themselves like Daniel, the badge would always be respected. To immigrants in the town, he was living proof that America could be a land of opportunity, where hard work and honesty opened doors. To longtime residents, he was the neighbor who never forgot a birthday or a name. The sight of his uniform reassured parents that their children could walk safely home and that their businesses would remain secure at night. No one questioned his devotion to Maine, and no one ever imagined that his right to serve could be challenged. For the community, Daniel wasn't just enforcing the law, he was embodying the very values that the law was meant to protect. To them, he was not just an officer, he was family. Asterisk, the change started slowly, almost quietly, but it soon spread like a storm across Maine. Under Trump's new immigration crackdown, families who had lived in the United States for decades suddenly found themselves under suspicion. Homes were raided in the early hours of the morning, workplaces were visited by federal agents, and whole communities began to live in fear. The same neighbors who once felt safe now looked over their shoulders, wondering if they would be next. Officer Daniel continued his duty as always, standing tall in his uniform. A whisper soon reached him that his own name was on a list. Years ago, when he had first arrived in America, a mistake in paperwork had left his immigration status incomplete. For years, the issue had never been raised, and he had built his life, career, and family openly with pride and dignity. But under the new rules, the past suddenly mattered more than the present. It didn't matter that Daniel had never broken a law, that he had risked his life daily for the safety of his community, or that children looked up to him as a role model. In the cold letters of the law, he was simply undocumented. Fear spread through the police department as fellow officers realized what was about to happen. How could a man who had sworn to protect the people of Maine now be treated as though he were an enemy? Daniel himself tried to remain calm, reassuring his family and colleagues that truth and justice would prevail. But deep down, he knew the reality. This was not about right or wrong, but about power and policy. And no amount of service or sacrifice could shield him from what was coming next. Asterisk, it was an ordinary morning when everything changed. The air was crisp outside the small police station in Maine, and Officer Daniel had just finished his night shift. He was tired but proud, greeting his fellow officers with the same calm smile he always wore. Then, without warning, dark vans pulled into the lot and federal agents stepped out in silence. Their presence felt heavy, their eyes cold, their mission clear. Daniel looked around, confused, until he realized they had come for him. The sight was surreal. A man who wore the badge, who had sworn an oath to uphold the law, now being treated like a criminal. His fellow officers froze, torn between duty and loyalty, unsure whether to speak or to move. Daniel raised his hand slowly, not in resistance, but in dignity. His uniform gleaming under the morning sun. Parents and children passing by stopped in disbelief as they saw their trusted protector placed in handcuffs. Some cried out, others shouted at the agents, but nothing changed the order. Even the station chief, a man who had praised Daniel countless times, stood helpless as the decision unfolded. For the community, it was a moment of betrayal too heavy to bear. To see one of their own, a man who had risked his life countless times for their safety, dragged away under the very laws he had sworn to uphold. was a wound deeper than any crime. Daniel did not cry, did not shout, but his silence was louder than words. He walked with his head held high, as if telling his people that his honor could not be taken, even if his freedom was. That morning, Maine did not just lose a police officer, it lost a piece of its soul. The news spread faster than wildfire. By nightfall, every corner of Maine knew what had happened to Officer Daniel. People who had once been quiet and cautious now poured into the streets, their voices rising. In anger and heartbreak, mothers held signs that read, "He protected our children. Who protects him?" While fathers who once stood silently by watched with fists clenched, demanding answers. Teenagers he had mentored marched at the front of the protests, shouting his name with pride, refusing to let his story be buried. Churches rang their bells. Businesses closed in solidarity, and neighbors of every background came together to demand justice. Reporters crowded the town, broadcasting images of a community that refused to stay silent. Across America, millions watched in shock as one question echoed louder than all others. How could a man trusted to defend a city be treated as disposable? Even Daniel's fellow officers broke their silence, giving emotional statements about his bravery and fairness. Some stood in uniform alongside protesters, risking their own careers to say he deserved better. Politicians and activists debated fiercely on television, with some defending the law and others calling it an inhuman mistake. But for the people who knew Daniel, this was not about politics. It was about a man who had given his heart to his community, only to be torn away. Anger turned into determination, and outrage turned into movement. What began as a local protest grew into a nationwide debate, drawing support from voices across the country. To his community, Daniel's deportation was not just an injustice. It was a betrayal that revealed the cracks in a system meant to serve and protect. And those who loved him were no longer asking quietly, they were demanding to be heard. Days turned into weeks, but the memory of Officer Daniel did not fade. His absence was felt in every corner of Maine, in the empty seat at the youth center where he once guided troubled teens, in the quiet streets where children no longer ran to greet their favorite officer, and in the police station where his locker now stood untouched, a silent reminder of loyalty betrayed. Yet, even in his absence, his spirit refused to die. The outrage he left behind sparked conversations across the nation, forcing people to look at the cost of policies that valued papers over people. In classrooms, teachers spoke of Daniel's kindness as a lesson in what true service meant. In homes, parents reminded their children that courage was not only found on the battlefield, but also in the everyday choices of men like him. Artists painted murals of his image, depicting him not as a victim, but as a hero who stood tall even when the system failed him. For his community, Daniel became more than a police officer. He became a symbol of dignity, unity, and resistance. Though deported, his story carried beyond borders, igniting solidarity movements in other towns and cities where families feared the same fate. People who had never met him marched under banners with his name, their voices demanding that no other protector, no other neighbor, no other father should face the same injustice. And in Maine, where his journey began, children still played under the murals painted in his honor, whispering that one day he would return. Daniel's body may have been forced out, but his legacy had taken root in the hearts of his people. Long after the storm faded, Maine would remember him not as the man they lost, but as the hero they could never forget. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and share to spread the message. Subscribe now to Fossil Histories for more powerful stories that keep history alive.